The morning of my 68th birthday arrived without ceremony. Pale sunlight slipped through the thin kitchen curtains, settling on the table where my hands rested, the skin looser now, the veins more visible than they once were. I made myself tea, listened to the kettle click off, and thought about how birthdays had learned to whisper instead of sing. There were no balloons, no plans, just routine and the ache of noticing who hadn't called. I was rinsing my cup when I heard a knock. When I opened the door and saw my daughter standing there with a wrapped box, something tightened in my chest. We hugged briefly, carefully, like people afraid of pressing on old bruises. Her smile was polite. Mine was too. She handed me the gift, and I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a tablet, sleek and unfamiliar in my hands. I blinked, surprised. She'd been struggling financially for years, and we'd barely spoken lately. I asked if she was sure. She nodded too quickly and changed the subject. I didn't realize then that accepting that gift meant accepting a truth I wasn't ready to see. After she left, I sat at the table and turned the tablet on. The screen lit the room. I told myself it was her way of reaching out, starting over. As I scrolled through the home screen, I felt hope, believing this device might be the first step toward healing. After my wife died 8 years ago, life narrowed into something small and manageable. I woke early, made tea the same way every morning, read the paper front to back, and took a slow walk past the same hedges and mailboxes. I never wanted much. Honesty mattered. Keeping promises mattered. Silence, when chosen carefully, felt kinder. Then noise. My daughter hadn't always lived at a distance from me. As a child, she was sharp and curious, the kind who asked why until adults ran out of answers. Teachers praised her. Neighbors said she would go far. Somewhere along the way, that brightness turned restless. She changed paths off in schools. Jobs, friends, always convinced the next choice would finally settle her. I tried to trust her judgment, even when it worried me. Our arguments were never loud. They came quietly, disguised as concern. I questioned her spending when money disappeared. Too fast. I asked about unfinished plans, unpaid bills, and promises she made with confidence but never kept. She heard judgment where I meant caution. Each conversation ended politely, but something retreated afterward, leaving more space between us than before. After her mother's funeral, I softened in ways I didn't admit out loud. Grief made me afraid of losing more than I already had. When my daughter asked for help, I gave it. When she avoided questions, I let them go. Peace felt like the right choice, even if it came at the cost of clarity. I told myself she would find her footing eventually. There were signs I chose not to examine closely. Missed calls returned days later. Stories that changed in small, almost unnoticeable ways. A tension in her voice when money was mentioned. None of it felt criminal or dramatic, just unsettled, like furniture shifted slightly. Out of place. I didn't accuse. I didn't press. I waited. My own life remained transparent and predictable. Receipts filed neatly. Accounts balanced to the cent. Evenings spent reading or listening to the radio fade into static. My daughter's life, by contrast, felt guarded. She shared outcomes, not processes. Results, not reasons. I respected her privacy, telling myself adulthood demanded that distance. The tablet slipped easily into my routine. I read the news on it, looked up old photos, watched lectures late at night. It felt like a quiet bridge between us, something she had chosen to place in my hands. Each day I used it, my trust grew, and with it the belief that whatever silence existed between us was finally beginning to close. I carried my regrets quietly, like loose change in a pocket, always aware of their weight. I wondered whether firmness earlier might have spared her confusion later. or whether love had simply taken the shape of avoidance. Parenting, I learned too late, offers no clean ledger. Every kindness hides a cost, and every boundary risks loss. Still, I told myself trust was a form of faith. The tablet became part of that faith, resting beside my chair each evening. It felt harmless, almost tender, a modern extension of her presence. I believed that by using it, by accepting her gift without question, I was choosing connection over suspicion and hope over fear. In those days, nothing about the tablet felt dangerous. It felt like proof that she still trusted me, and that I should trust her in return. I didn't know then how easily trust can be borrowed, repurposed, and left behind, waiting for someone else to discover what it truly costs. That belief settled in me quietly, steady and unquestioned, shaping the days that followed without warning signs. At first, nothing felt wrong. The tablet slipped easily into my days, and I used it without thought. Then my daughter began calling. More often. Not long conversations, just quick check-ins that arrived at odd hours. She asked whether the tablet was working properly, whether it ever froze or lagged. I answered casually, though the questions lingered. Her voice carried attention. I pretended not to hear. A few days later, the tablet behaved strangely. It would light up without warning, notifications flashing too quickly to read. Once, a folder appeared on the screen for half a second before disappearing. I told myself it was a glitch, nothing more. But small doubts began collecting quietly. My daughter called again, asking if I had opened anything unfamiliar. I said no, and she exhaled audibly, as if relieved. That relief unsettled me. I began noticing how quickly she changed subjects, how carefully she avoided details. Each call ended politely, yet left me uneasy. I argued with myself late at night. Parents should respect privacy, I thought. Trust, once broken, rarely returns. Whole, I remembered earlier moments I had dismissed too easily. The unpaid credit card years ago. A job she quit without explanation. The way she once asked me to hold mail for her, just for a while. At the time, I had chosen understanding over inquiry. I told myself love meant giving space. Now that belief felt thinner. The tablet sat on the table like an unopened letter. I avoided it for hours, then picked it up again. Nothing obvious appeared, only familiar apps and photos. Still, the feeling remained. My daughter's calls continued, sometimes twice a day. She asked whether I had updated the system, whether I had reset anything. I reassured her, though my chest tightened. I felt caught between two duties. One was to trust my child. The other was to trust my instincts. I chose again to remain silent. If I had asked one question sooner, everything might have changed. That thought followed me through the house. I dusted shelves, watered plants, and tried to quiet my mind. Yet curiosity pressed gently, persistent as a tide. It wasn't suspicion, not yet. It was a father's unease, shaped by years of watching and waiting. Late one evening, I held the tablet longer than usual. The house was quiet, and my resolve felt thin. I told myself I would only look briefly, just enough to settle my nerves. Curiosity, once ignored, had finally overtaken hesitation. It felt less like a decision and more like a surrender. I reminded myself I wasn't searching for wrongdoing. I was searching for reassurance. My finger hovered over the screen, uncertain. In that pause, I saw years of quiet choices lining up. Behind me, every time I had chosen patience over clarity, every time I had hoped distance would heal itself. The tablet warmed slightly in my hands. It felt ordinary, harmless, and yet my pulse quickened. I thought of my daughter as a child, sitting at this same table. She had trusted me then without question. That memory steadied me. I told myself truth, whatever it was, would be better than imagination. I didn't know how heavy truth could feel. The room seemed to hold its breath. Outside, a car passed, tires whispering on pavement. Inside, I unlocked the screen. It was a small act, almost invisible, but it marked the moment when silence stopped protecting us. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired of not knowing. The curiosity that rose in me was quiet, deliberate. It carried no accusation, only a need to understand. As I began to explore the tablet more carefully, I still believed trust would be rewarded. I had no idea it was about to ask something far more difficult of me. The first tap felt heavier than it should have. I paused again, then continued. In that quiet kitchen, curiosity finally outweighed fear. It was no longer about a device, but about my daughter. And once that realization settled, there was no turning back. The story I believed was beginning to crack, and I was finally ready to look. I didn't understand what that choice would cost. I noticed it by accident one evening, long after the house had gone quiet. Rain tapped steadily against the windows, and the only light in the room came from the tablet glowing in my hands. I wasn't searching for anything specific, only moving slowly, carefully, as if restraint might still protect me. When a folder appeared that I didn't recognize, my finger froze. Its name meant nothing to me. I told myself it was harmless, some system remnant, yet my pulse answered otherwise. I opened it, already aware that something inside was waiting for me alone that night in silence. The files revealed themselves slowly, as if reluctant to be seen. Financial records filled the screen first, accounts I didn't recognize, numbers that didn't belong to any ordinary budget. There were transfers, dates, names blurred by codes instead of letters. I scrolled, my hands beginning to shake, the rain outside growing heavier. Messages followed, locked behind encryption prompts I couldn't fully open, but fragments were enough. Words like access, verification, temporary use. My stomach tightened. This wasn't carelessness. It was planning. Careful, deliberate, and far beyond anything I imagined for my daughter until that moment sitting alone at home quietly. It took longer for understanding to arrive. Denial tried to cushion the impact, offering excuses I wanted to accept. Perhaps she was holding something for a friend. Perhaps she hadn't meant harm. I searched for innocence the way one searches for lost keys, convinced it had to be nearby. But the pattern was unmistakable. The tablet wasn't accidental. It wasn't a gift. It was a bridge, a place to store what couldn't live on our own devices without drawing attention from banks, companies, and systems meant to protect people like me, who trusted quietly and never asked questions before then. The glow of the screen felt harsh against the dark kitchen. My hands trembled openly now, no longer pretending calm. Rain traced uneven paths down the glass, mirroring the feeling in my chest. I thought of my daughter, of her voice, her careful smiles. I told myself desperation drives people to foolish places. I told myself she never intended for me to be involved. Each explanation softened the truth, just enough to breathe. Love has a way of negotiating with reality when it's cornered and refuses to surrender without a struggle, even when facts stand clearly exposed before our eyes. I sat there alone. Time, the tablet resting heavily on my palms. Protecting her felt instinctive, almost automatic. I imagined confronting her quietly, giving her time to explain, to undo what she'd done. I imagined deleting files, pretending ignorance. Parenthood teaches you how quickly protection becomes habit. But another truth pressed forward, unwelcome and firm. By staying silent, I was already part of what she'd built. The realization settled slowly, like cold into bone. It numbed movement and demanded attention. I could no longer claim innocence honestly, without betraying my own values, completely that once guided every choice, sleep never came that night. I paced the kitchen, listening to rain fade toward morning. Each step felt heavier than the last. I rehearsed conversations that never found a voice. My daughter's face hovered in my mind, equal parts child and stranger. I loved her. That truth remained unshaken. But love didn't erase consequence. It only complicated it. I understood. Then that silence was no longer kindness. It was permission. Permission for harm to continue quietly. I felt older than my years in that moment. Not because of age, but because of clarity. Clarity that demanded action from me alone. By dawn, the decision no longer felt like mine. Truth had weight, and it pressed forward without asking permission. I didn't know how to confront my daughter, or whether I even should. I only knew that pretending ignorance would make me complicit. The tablet lay dark on the table, no longer neutral. It carried evidence, responsibility, and consequence. As the rain finally stopped, I accepted what silence could no longer protect. Understanding had reached its limit. What came next would be painful but necessary. I stood there, knowing this was no longer just family. It was truth demanding witness now. I was already awake when the knock came. Dawn had not yet broken, and the house sat in that gray, suspended quiet where night hasn't quite released its grip. I had been awake for hours, sitting in my chair, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, knowing something was coming. When? I opened the door and saw 2 police officers standing there. I felt no shock, only a heavy confirmation settle in my chest. They spoke calmly, respectfully. They explained there had been an investigation unfolding for weeks, a pattern of digital activity tied to financial fraud and identity theft. Accounts accessed from multiple locations, data routed through devices never registered to the primary suspect. One officer asked if I owned a tablet. I nodded. When they mentioned the serial number, I understood fully that silence had already run out. My daughter was still in the house. She stepped into the hallway, drawn by unfamiliar voices. The moment. Her eyes met mine. Something collapsed in her expression. There was no anger in it, only fear. She didn't ask what was happening. She already knew. The officers explained again, slower this time, outlining the trail that had led to her and to me. The tablet had been the bridge, the place she believed no one would look. She began to cry quietly, shoulders folding inward as if trying to disappear. Words came out in fragments. Debt that had grown faster than she could control. A panic that never left. Decisions made at night when fear felt louder than reason. She said she never meant to hurt anyone. She said she never thought I'd find out. I believed her. Not because it excused anything, but because desperation often speaks before morality finds its voice. In that moment, my role shifted. I was no longer just her father standing between her and the world. I was a witness to truth. The officers looked to me, not unkindly, and asked for the tablet. I went to the table, picked it up, and felt its weight one last time. I handed it over without hesitation. My hands were steady. I understood that love could not rewrite facts. My daughter looked at me then, really looked, searching my face for rescue or anger or forgiveness. What she found was something quieter, acceptance, not of what she had done, but of what had to happen next. As they led her away, she turned once more, eyes wet, lips pressed tight, and that final look carried everything we could not say. When the door closed behind them, the house fell silent. The kind of silence that follows truth when nothing else needs to be explained. The house felt unfamiliar after they left, as if something essential had been removed along with my daughter. Chairs stood where they always had. The clock continued ticking, yet the air carried the echo of unfamiliar footsteps and official voices. I walked through each room slowly, noticing details I had ignored for years. A picture frame slightly crooked. The faint smell of rain still clinging to the doorway. It was astonishing how quickly normal life can fracture and then insist on continuing anyway. Love didn't disappear with her absence. If anything, it became heavier. It sat beside betrayal and responsibility, all three sharing the same quiet space inside me. I loved my daughter deeply. I was hurt by what she had done, and I understood, with painful clarity, that shielding her from consequence would only extend the harm. Those truths did not cancel one another out. They existed together, unresolved but real. In the days that followed, I visited the station when asked and spoke with a lawyer when advised. Each conversation was measured, factual, stripped of emotion. I answered questions honestly, without embellishment or defense. No one asked me to lie, but I recognized the opportunities where omission might have softened her situation. I chose not to take them. Justice, I realized, only works when it is allowed to stand without interference, even when it costs you something personal. People offered opinions I did not seek. Some said I should have protected her at all costs. Others spoke harshly, reducing her to her worst decision. I rejected both extremes. She was neither innocent nor irredeemable. She was my daughter, flawed and frightened, accountable for her actions. Refusing to villainize her felt as important as refusing to excuse her. At night, the house settled into a new rhythm. I slept unevenly at first, then more deeply as days passed. Pain gave way to a quieter understanding. There was a strange peace in having told the truth completely. It wasn't relief, exactly, but clarity. The kind that stops your mind from circling endlessly around what might have been. Time did what it always does. It moved forward, reshaping routines, dulling sharp edges. I returned to my walks, my reading, my careful mornings. Life didn't become easier, but it became honest. And in that honesty, I found a steadiness I hadn't known I was missing. Months passed, and the world continued in its ordinary way, indifferent to the quiet storm that had passed through my life. My mornings returned to their familiar rhythm: tea, paper, slow walks, but now they carried a different weight. The tablet was gone. In its place, a stack of letters sat on the table, each one written in my daughter's hand. The first was brief, the next longer, and the last was the kind of letter that felt like a person trying to rebuild themselves with careful pieces. We visited each other occasionally, under the rules the system imposed. The first visit was awkward, filled with the kind of silence that feels heavier than any argument. She looked older than her age, tired in a way that wasn't just physical. Her eyes held the same spark, but it was tempered by something steadier: responsibility. She spoke less about excuses and more about what she was learning. She was taking accountability, not for the sake of appearing good, but because she had begun to understand the cost of her choices. Our relationship did not return to what it once was. It did not become the simple, unguarded closeness of old times. That was a fantasy I had to let go of. Instead, we built something different, something grounded in truth. We spoke honestly about what had happened, without shame, without blame. She asked for forgiveness, and I offered it not as a way to erase the past, but as a way to move forward, without carrying hatred. I learned something I hadn't fully understood before. Love is not protection from consequence. Love does not mean preventing pain. Sometimes love means letting the person you care face the results of their actions, even when it hurts you to watch. The dignity of that truth was difficult, but it was real. I still miss the illusion I once had of who she was. I miss the certainty, the ease, the hope that everything would always turn out well. But I did not lose the most important thing. I kept the truth of loving her honestly. Asterisk.